There's something different about middle children who learn to be invisible. Maybe it's the way they can read a room's emotional temperature before anyone else notices the shift. Maybe it's how they navigate conflict without making it about themselves. Or maybe it's that peculiar combination of independence and empathy that seems woven into their DNA. Because being born in the middle didn't just create a birth order position, it forged a specific type of psychological architecture that researchers are only now beginning to understand. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to see why growing up invisible in your own family created some of the most emotionally intelligent and self-sufficient people you'll ever meet. While firstborns got the spotlight and youngest got the safety net, middle children got something else entirely. They got ignored. Not in the dramatic, neglectful way that triggers intervention, but in that every day, we'll get to you after we deal with your brother, way that becomes the background noise of childhood. And that invisibility, that constant experience of being the afterthought, didn't break them. It built them into adults who can operate independently, who don't need validation to know their worth, who can see all sides of a situation because they spent their childhood watching from the margins. This isn't about birth order astrology or pop psychology stereotypes. This is about what happens to a developing brain when it learns early that survival means being seen without demanding to be seen, mattering without insisting you matter. Let's start with something that crystallized the entire experience into a single image. Picture yourself at maybe 10 or 11 years old, and your mom is showing visiting relatives the family photo album. There's your older brother's first day of school, full page, perfectly centered, that gap-toothed smile taking up the entire frame. Turn the page. There's your younger sister's baby pictures, an entire section, dozens of photos, every milestone documented. Then there's you. You're in the background of your brother's Little League photo. You're half cut off at the edge of a Thanksgiving dinner shot. There's one photo, just one, where you're actually the subject, and it's slightly out of focus. Your aunt makes a joke about it. Oh, that's right, you're the middle one. Everyone laughs. You laugh too because that's what you do. But later, alone in your room, you count the pages. Your brother, 23 pages. Your sister, 31 pages. You, 7 pages. And you're only the main subject in 3 of them. What psychologists Catherine Salmon and Katrin Schumann call middle child syndrome isn't actually a syndrome at all. It's a documented pattern of differential parental investment. Research shows parents unconsciously allocate fewer resources, time, money, photographs, attention to middle children. A 2015 study from Brigham Young University found that middle children receive, on average, 25% less one-on-one time with parents than their siblings. But here's what's fascinating. This wasn't catastrophic. It was formative. That photo album wasn't evidence of rejection. It was a map of your psychological development. You were learning something crucial. Your worth doesn't depend on documentation. These are adults who don't need their achievements plastered across social media to feel validated. They're not the ones posting every meal, every accomplishment, every moment. Not because they're humble, though they often are, but because they learned young that existing without constant documentation is possible. They're secure in knowing that mattering and being seen are 2 different things. In a culture addicted to visibility, they carry this rare psychological freedom, the ability to be significant without needing an audience. But the photographs were just the evidence of something that happened every single day at the dinner table. Now, let's talk about what happened 6 nights a week at 6:30 in the evening. You're sitting in your designated seat, always the same seat, the one nobody fights over, because it's not next to mom or dad. Your older sister is telling everyone about making the honor roll. Your father is beaming, asking detailed questions about her classes. Your mother is already planning a celebration. Then your little brother spills his milk, the entire glass, spreading across the table. Everything stops. Your mother jumps up. Your father grabs towels. Your little brother is getting hugs. Because accidents happen. Sweetie, it's okay. The honor roll conversation continues while they clean. You sit there, watching the milk drip onto the floor, and you realize something. You could tell them about making the basketball team today, but the moment has passed. It's always passing. So you wait, you eat, you help clear plates. Later, washing dishes alone while they watch TV, you mention it casually. "That's nice, honey," your mom calls from the living room, not looking up. Alfred Adler, who pioneered birth order theory in the 1920s, noted that middle children develop what he called the negotiator personality. They learn to read social dynamics and find openings for their needs without creating conflict. Research from the Journal of Family Psychology shows middle children score significantly higher on tests of emotional perception and social flexibility. They had to. Every dinner table was a masterclass in timing, in reading room temperature, in knowing when to speak, and when silence is strategic. What looks like being overlooked was actually intensive training in social intelligence. These adults walk into meetings and instantly know the power dynamics, who's aligned with whom, where the tensions live. They know when to speak up and when to let others tire themselves out first. They're the ones who notice when someone's upset before anyone else does, who remember to check on the quiet person in the corner. Not because they're naturally empathetic saints, but because they spent 18 years learning that attention is a scarce resource requiring strategic navigation. And nowhere was that scarcity more evident than when birthdays rolled around. Let's shift to something that should have been entirely about you, but somehow never was. Your birthday is in November. Your older brother's is in October. Your younger sister's is in December. So your mother has this brilliant idea. Let's combine the celebrations. One big party in November saves time and money. You're turning 9. Your brother just turned 11 2 weeks ago, but his friends are invited. Your sister is about to turn 6 next month, so her entire preschool class is there. The cake has 3 names. When it's time to sing, they sing once. All 3 names crammed together. When you blow out candles, your sister needs help, so everyone waits. When you open presents, your brother gets expensive gifts because he's older now. Your sister gets tons of presents because she's still little. You get books and clothes, practical things. Later, you find your mother telling your aunt. It's so much easier this way. And besides, he doesn't mind. The assumption that you don't mind becomes the reason nobody asks if you mind. Developmental psychologist Susan Newman's research on birth order effects found that middle children experience what she terms compressed celebrations. Their milestones are often minimized or combined with siblings' events. But here's the unexpected finding from her 2018 longitudinal study. These children develop significantly higher resilience scores and lower entitlement indices. They learn that specialness isn't a birthright requiring external validation. What researchers call adaptive realism, the capacity to accept limitations without resentment, was being built into them year after year, cake after cake. These adults don't expect the world to stop for them. They don't need elaborate celebrations or grand gestures. Their birthday? Maybe a quiet dinner with close friends. They're genuinely puzzled by people who need a birthday week or who sulk when others forget the date, not because they don't value themselves, but because they learned early that your significance doesn't depend on everyone else acknowledging it. They know how to celebrate themselves internally, which makes them virtually immune to the disappointment that comes from unmet expectations. But invisibility wasn't just about being overlooked. Sometimes it meant being used. Consider what happened whenever conflict erupted in your house. Your older brother and younger sister are fighting over the TV remote. It starts with raised voices, escalates to pushing. Your parents aren't home. They're at your brother's baseball game, then rushing to your sister's dance recital. You're home because your thing got canceled, or maybe it just wasn't important enough to attend. The fight is getting physical now. You step in, not because anyone asked you to, but because someone has to. You negotiate. Your brother gets the TV until 7. Your sister gets it after. You're 12 years old, playing marriage counselor to your siblings. Your brother calls you annoying. Your sister calls you bossy. But the fight stops. When your parents get home hours later, everything is calm. They don't ask how. They don't notice. This becomes your job, the unnamed, unpaid job of keeping the peace so the family functions. Psychologist Tony Falbo's research on sibling conflict resolution found that middle children develop mediation skills at significantly younger ages than their siblings. They become what family systems theorists call triangulated peacekeepers, positioned between competing forces, forced to develop sophisticated conflict resolution strategies. A 2019 study in the Journal of Personality showed middle children score 31% higher on tests of perspective taking and compromise ability. This wasn't optional character development. This was survival. When you're stuck between warring siblings, peacemaking becomes your role because chaos makes you disappear even more. These adults are the ones defusing tense meetings, finding common ground in impossible negotiations, seeing solutions that satisfy everyone. They're the friends both sides of a divorce confide in because they genuinely don't take sides. They're exhausting to be sometimes, always mediating, always finding middle ground, but in a world increasingly polarized, they're invaluable. They carry this deep-wired belief that there's always a third option between two extremes, because they had to find it every single day. And the invisibility created another paradox. The rules applied to you in the strangest ways. Now, let's talk about something that made absolutely no sense until years later. You're 13, and you want to go to a friend's house. Your older brother at 13 had a curfew, needed to check in, had parents who knew exactly where he was. Your younger sister at 9 has GPS tracking before it's even common. But you mention you're going out. Your mother is helping your brother with college applications. Your father is at your sister's soccer game. Okay, be back for dinner, someone calls without looking up. You're gone for 6 hours. Nobody calls. Nobody checks. You come home at 9 in the evening, 3 hours after dinner, and nobody noticed. You broke curfew that didn't exist. You broke rules nobody enforced. You weren't rebelling. You were just unmonitored. Your older sibling had strict boundaries. Your younger sibling has helicopter parenting. You had something stranger, the freedom that comes from being forgotten. What developmental psychologist Lawrence Steinberg calls permissive invisibility isn't true permissiveness. It's inconsistent monitoring that stems from resource depletion. Parents practicing intensive parenting with their first child often experience what he terms monitoring fatigue by the middle child. His research shows middle children receive 40% less rule enforcement than siblings. But here's the paradox his 2020 study revealed. These children don't exhibit the negative outcomes typically associated with permissive parenting. Instead, they develop higher self-regulation and internal locus of control. They learn to parent themselves because nobody else was paying close enough attention. These adults don't wait for permission. They don't need external validation to make decisions. They're the ones who've already solved the problem before asking if they should solve the problem. They have strong internal compasses because they had to develop them young. Nobody was steering their ship closely enough to guide them through every decision. They're not reckless. They're self-directed. There's a difference. They learned that responsibility isn't about following rules someone else enforces. It's about choosing your own rules and living by them. But being invisible meant you were always being measured against ghosts. Let's address something that happened almost daily. So often you stop noticing how much it shaped you. You bring home a B+ on your report card. Your mother looks at it and says, Your sister always got A's in the subject. 5 minutes later, your father looks at your math grade, an A minus, and says, well, at least you're doing better than your brother did in math. You exist in this constant state of comparison, never quite measuring up to one sibling in one area while being expected to exceed the other sibling in different areas. You're too old to get the coddling your younger sibling gets. Well, he's only 8. What did you expect? But you're too young to get the respect your older sibling commands. When your sister was your age, she was already working part-time. You're caught in between, held to whichever standard makes you look most insufficient in that particular moment. Psychologist Kevin Lehman's research on birth order comparisons found that middle children experience what he calls bidirectional comparison stress, measured against standards from both older and younger siblings simultaneously. His studies show this creates what Carol Dweck's framework would identify as adaptive comparative thinking, the ability to assess self-worth independent of others' achievements. A UCLA study found middle children develop significantly lower dependence on external validation metrics. They had to. 8. Being everyone's measuring stick while simultaneously being measured meant they learned early that comparison is endless unless you opt out. These adults genuinely don't care much about keeping up with the Joneses. They're not on competitive social media spirals. When someone brags about their success, middle children just don't engage in the measuring contest. Not from superiority, but from psychological exhaustion. They used up their comparison energy. By age 15, now they just do their thing. They celebrate others' wins without it diminishing their own worth. They accept their losses without catastrophizing. They learn the only person you're actually competing with is yesterday's version of yourself. But here's where invisibility gave them something unexpected: radical freedom. Now, let's talk about what most people miss about being the invisible middle child. You're 15. Your older sibling is under intense scrutiny, college applications, maintaining the family's academic reputation, carrying the weight of firstborn expectations. Your younger sibling is still being closely monitored. Where are you going? Who are you with? Be home by dark. But you're just there. You experiment with your style and nobody comments. You switch friend groups and nobody notices. You try new interests, photography, poetry, whatever, and there's no pressure to excel or perform. You fail at things privately. You discover who you are without an audience. Your siblings are performing their lives for parental approval. You're living yours in the margins. And while they're stressed about meeting expectations or breaking rules, you're developing this self without all that external noise. You're becoming someone without having to clear it with a committee. Identity development researcher James Marsh's framework identifies 4 identity statuses, with achievement, knowing who you are, through exploration, being the healthiest. His research collaborator Seth Schwartz found that middle children reach identity achievement earlier and with less parental conflict than siblings. They had what developmental psychologists call low surveillance autonomy, freedom to explore identity without constant parental input. Research from the American Psychological Association shows this correlates with higher authenticity scores and lower people-pleasing tendencies in adulthood. The invisibility wasn't just neglect. It was accidentally ideal conditions for authentic self-development. These adults have remarkably clear senses of self. They know what they like, not what they're supposed to like. They don't need approval to pursue interests. They're not performing an identity crafted for others' consumption. They're just themselves, fully formed, self-determined. While others are still figuring out who they are without their parents' expectations or peers' judgments, middle children already did that work in the blessed privacy of being overlooked. They developed their identity in a low-stakes laboratory where mistakes didn't become family legend. And all of this, the invisibility, the comparisons, the freedom, forged something specific. This all adds up to something profound. Let's bring this full circle to what all of this created. You're 8 years old, and you need help with your homework. Your mother is helping your older brother with his science project. It's due tomorrow, and it's worth a major grade. Your father is reading to your younger sister. It's her bedtime routine, sacred and non-negotiable. You wait. You wait longer. Eventually, you figure it out yourself. You learn to use the dictionary, sound out words, make sense of instructions. This happens over and over. Need new shoes? Your older sibling gets taken shopping. You get hand-me-downs until you learn to use your birthday money. Need a ride somewhere? They're driving your siblings. You learn to ride your bike farther than you probably should. Need emotional support after a bad day? Everyone's busy. You learn to process your feelings by writing in a journal nobody will read. Slowly, invisibly, you're building a foundation of self-reliance so complete you don't even recognize it as unusual. What psychologist Emmy Werner calls resilient self-sufficiency emerged in her longitudinal studies as a hallmark of middle children. Her 40-year research following middle children found they develop problem-solving autonomy and emotional self-regulation significantly earlier than siblings. They weren't taught self-sufficiency through intention. They learned it through necessity. Albert Bandura's self-efficacy research shows that mastery experiences, successfully handling challenges alone, build confidence more effectively than any other intervention. Middle children got thousands of these mastery experiences. Every time they solved their own problem, they were building what researchers now recognize as unshakable self-trust. These adults don't panic when they're on their own. They don't need constant support, validation, or reassurance. They can move to new cities without falling apart. They can handle breakups without calling everyone they know. They can face unemployment, health scares, major life changes with this quiet confidence that they'll figure it out. Because they always have. They're not cold or disconnected. They're just fundamentally okay being alone with their problems before reaching out for help. They learned early that help might not come, so they became the help they needed. But let's be honest, not all of this invisibility was healthy. Some middle children weren't just overlooked, they were genuinely neglected. Some developed such complete self-sufficiency, they struggle to ask for help, even when they desperately need it. Some are so comfortable being invisible, they've made themselves too small in their own lives. The comparison stress created anxiety for some. The peacemaking role became an exhausting burden. These patterns had costs, real psychological costs that don't disappear just because we can identify some benefits. This isn't about romanticizing being invisible or claiming that benign neglect is actually ideal parenting. Some of it was just being forgotten, and that hurt. But it was different than what other birth orders experienced. And that difference created a specific type of psychological architecture that's worth understanding. The invisible middle child learned something that's increasingly difficult to learn in our attention-obsessed world, that you can matter without being seen. That your worth isn't measured by documentation, celebration, or constant validation. That the most authentic version of yourself might be the one you developed when nobody was watching. They learned to read rooms, mediate conflicts, regulate their own emotions, develop their own identities, and trust themselves completely, not through intention, but through necessity. That bone-deep self-trust, that ability to be significant without needing to be seen, that psychological independence that doesn't collapse under pressure. These are the gifts of invisibility. And in a world where everyone is performing their lives for an audience, where validation is currency and attention is oxygen, these invisible middle children carry something increasingly rare: the capacity to exist fully and completely without needing anyone to watch.